Like everyone, I tuned into the Loki finale and left it feeling satisfied, which is something that's hard to come by as of late for Marvel. Their stories seem to hold no weight or stakes or display any acts of sacrifice like they did before. Everything that we longed to see in a hero's journey was all of a sudden turned into a product, a machine, something to please the largest number of fans, but missing that care that is so important in these stories. Like, do you guys remember when Iron Man went from a
genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist,
and did this? Then said this?
How can you possibly hope to stop me?
like the old man said. Together.
And then did this? And then topped it all off by doing this? The MCU had a powerful understanding of emotion, and had an unparalleled way to create story arcs that would keep us lined up at the movies, trying to book seats, have us watching those hour-long breakdown videos. I really miss that. But here comes the finale of Loki Season 2, at an unexpected time. The finale aired during a time where Marvel is at its lowest. I mean, just search MCU up on YouTube, and you'll see the amount of displeased fans, and I really didn't want to ever be one of them. I had hope in this franchise for the longest time, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't fade away with each release. But here came Loki's conclusion, a perfect end to 10 years of his journey, and all of a sudden, I was that little boy again, that sat in those theater chairs and watched my favorite characters grow up with me on screen, and end off their stories in empowering and impactful ways, showing me what it means to be a hero. It isn't always as simple as good or bad. Our complex heroes struggle, they fall, they get back up, and they're redeemed. And Loki's journey is the best way to explore that, to explore what purpose can mean for a character that has looked for it his entire life, and it's something that I just had to talk about. Now, Loki has been there from the start, and although he's loved for his charm, charisma, wit, and ambition, I think what makes him stand out is his need for validation. It's so cool to me that the entire Infinity Saga propels into motion because Loki doesn't feel validated or loved. The entire saga starts off with the character fighting to be recognized and accepted, and ends with true love's kiss. I think there's a real beauty in that. Like, despite all the fighting and set pieces and secret endings and Easter eggs, the entire saga began because Loki didn't hold on to the hope of him being loved. And the entire series ended with the character holding on to the promise of love so tightly just to be with the one he vowed to dance to all those years back. Thor 1 was Loki's first appearance, and I know audiences don't like it that much, but it's one of my favorite Phase 1 movies. It's so Shakespearean. Even aside its dialogue, Thor 1 is a true hero's journey that illustrates the themes of vanity, arrogance, betrayal, and ultimately what it means to be a good king. A person that doesn't think of himself superior to his subjects, and one that serves his people. A lesson that Thor learned during his journey on Earth, and one that Loki never had the opportunity to learn. From the very start of his story, Loki lives in his brother's shadow, making himself out to be the wise and innocent brother as they transition to adulthood, contrasting Thor's arrogant self. And I really do believe that Loki cares for Thor, but as the revelations of his birthright and home are revealed, I think he becomes more and more jealous, vengeful, and resentful, leading to all his cruel actions in the film. But it's important to realize that all his vile actions come from that hurt, that Loki was nothing but a stolen relic, something to be used, not loved. He does everything he thinks is right to show his father that he's worthy, like his brother, and this story beat propels him into his truly villainous acts. I mean, just look at his performance here.
You took me for a purpose. What was it? Tell me! So I am no more than another stolen relic, locked up here until you might have use of me. Because no matter how much you claim to love me, you can never have a frost giant sitting on the throne of Asgard.
He's truly heartbroken as he realizes the reason why he could never be loved by his father, as Thor was, why he never had a chance to the throne, why he always felt out of place, and that lack of belonging feeds into more of his pain. Loki questions his purpose here, and that question remains till the conclusion of his story, and we see this purpose waver throughout his arc. And so our character believes that the only way to prove his worth to his father, Thor, Frigga, and himself is to show them that he has what it takes to rule. I love how it's all very human for a story told about gods, and so he acts out of vain throughout the movie, hurting Thor just as he himself feels that hurt, making Thor feel like he's not wanted by his father. His arc in this movie isn't world domination or snapping half of existence away. It's Loki lashing out on everyone because of his pain and his need for validation, his need to be worthy. And the scene that makes all this very tangible is where he makes a deal with the Frost Giants, allowing them to invade Asgard, only to kill them in front of his mother, so he finally gets that credit and validation. This writing choice really saved him from being a generic power-hungry villain into something much more sensitive. Loki moves forward to destroy Jotunheim. He wants to do it for Odin, to prove to him that he can be the king they need, something Thor initially wanted to do, but as Thor has gone through the hero's journey, he knows it's not right, and they face off in this battle of ideologies.
Why have you done this? To prove to Father that I am a worthy son. When he wakes, I will have saved his life, and I will be true heir to the throne. What is this newfound love for the Frost Giants? You could have killed them all with your bare hands.
He's such a strong antagonist for Thor in this movie, as Loki shows Thor a reflection of himself, what his arrogance and cruelty could have looked like, but also a reflection into their childhood, how Thor treated Loki as a second, as someone beneath him, the same way Thor thought of everyone else before he had his journey on Earth.
Look around you, we're outnumbered.
Know your place, brother.
I never wanted the throne. I only ever wanted to be your equal.
Loki clearly tears up during this battle. He's hurting, and Tom Hiddleston brings a powerful desperation to this character that is a joy to see. Loki pushes Thor to sacrifice his newfound love for Earth and Jane for the greater good, completing Thor's hero's journey. And that's why Loki is such a strong antagonist. He isn't just an evil reflection of Thor, but a character that pushes him into becoming a hero and learning the importance of sacrifice. And the movie ends with a scene that I'll definitely refer to again, as it serves as the foundation to one of the most emotional endings for a character I've ever seen. As the Bifrost breaks, Odin, Thor, and Loki all hold on to one another, hold on to their family ties, and in his last moments, Loki strives to prove to his father that he's enough, that he's worthy.
I could have done it, Father. I could have done it! For you! For all of us!
This line holds so much weight after the season 2 finale, a callback 12 years in the making. Loki at this point in the story cries out to his father, telling him that he could have done it, he could have proved his worth, for Odin, for everyone that rejected him, but most importantly, for himself. He goes through all of this to prove to himself that he belongs, that this was his purpose. That's all he wanted, that validation and acceptance. And so he lets go in that moment, in search of a new purpose, marking the start to a butterfly effect that leads all the way to Endgame, starting off with him being granted the scepter by Thanos, waging an attack on New York, as he believes that this new war is his glorious purpose. The Avengers came out at a time where a plot as simple as this worked. It's the same world-ending stakes that we're used to now, but it was new to see heroes rise up together to save the world. This was enhanced by Loki's presence. He was a power-hungry antagonist, but still brought this charm, theatricality, and showmanship that was just so addicting to watch.
I said... Is this not your natural state? You were made to be ruled. In the end, you will always kneel.
His personal relationship with Thor creates some depth, as we can see that Loki is still clearly acting out of the pain of being rejected, as he attempts to find his place and purpose.
I remember a shadow, living in the shade of your greatness. I remember you tossing me into an abyss, I who was and should be king.
And so he plays his part as the god of mischief to perfection, tearing the Avengers apart one by one, which results in one of the most satisfying scenes ever when our heroes team up. And that's what a great antagonist looks like, one that creates conflict and pushes our heroes into difficult situations, forcing them to adapt and to change. And so Loki loses the battle for New York, and his arc continues in Thor: The Dark World. We see that Loki still strives for Odin and Frigga to see him as worthy. He shows Odin that he was just trying to be a ruler, like him, when he waged his attack on Earth. And he is again reminded of where he came from, and what his birthright was.
I went down to Midgard to rule the people of Earth as a benevolent god, just like you.
Loki desires a throne.
It is my birthright. Your birthright was today!
And further showing Loki's struggle with his parents and in being accepted, highlighted by this scene.
Your father.
He's not my father!
Then am I not your mother?
You're not.
Loki continually acts out in vengeance, and it results in the death of his mother, which clearly affects him. It's powerful to see a character so flawed that keeps making mistakes and keeps finding himself in a worse position each time. The movie ends off his arc in a really cool way, where Loki fights alongside Thor and supposedly dies. And yeah, it's to fool Thor so he can go back and take over Asgard, but why else would he say this?
I'll tell Father what you did here today.
I didn't do it for him.
Loki cares for everyone, and cares what they think of him. He wants to be remembered. He just isn't sure yet of the right way to be remembered. And so we move on to Ragnarok, and I'm not gonna lie, I personally don't like Taika's comedic style. I think it lacks emotional weight. But to be fair, the movie does take its time when it needs to explore what Asgard means, to develop the relationship of Thor and Loki, and it does stay true to the character of Loki. We start off the story with Odin addressing both Loki and Thor as his sons, a scene that gives Loki what he's wanted all along, that acceptance, in which we get to see Loki mourn for the love he got at the end of Odin's life, a scene that propels his character arc into the conclusion of the film, where he arrives at Asgard to defend it, instead of conquering it, with all of the theatricality that defines Loki. And we get another peak MCU moment where we see two brothers that have been fighting for years finally come together. Despite the death of their parents and the destruction of their home, they finally are accepting and are at peace with one another, only to have Infinity War snatch that relationship away from Thor, away from us. Loki's arc could have ended right here. We finally got to see Loki declare himself as an Odinson and fight for what was right. He attempts to save all that he has left, Thor, and his sacrifice sets Thor on a perfect revenge arc that defined Infinity War. And although his sacrifice is heroic, Marvel wasn't done with him yet, and I'm actually happy that they didn't end his story here. Loki never got to understand his purpose. He did what was right in Infinity War, but I think the trajectory of his arc in the show concludes the story beautifully. The show does something really interesting. It starts Loki's arc from an earlier point in the story, a risky move, as the Dark World, Ragnarok, and Infinity War did a pretty good job of ending off his story, but Marvel plucked him out as the vengeful, jealous, and wounded Loki, and placed him into a world where he sees himself for what he is, and where his actions eventually lead him to. They basically speedrun his arc, and he gets to see how everything unfolds. Odin calling him his son, giving him that acceptance and validation that he's looked for his entire life, seeing Thor tell Loki that he has always meant the world to him, and he ultimately sees his hero's death and sacrifice. And paired with all of these revelations, Loki sees how the Infinity Stones are used as paperweights at the TVA. It really has him questioning his purpose. What does he do now? What is his story? It all seems to be predestined. Is he even in control of anything? As a god, antagonist, and character that has always been one step ahead of everyone, he feels lost. And so he has his arc in season 1, where he goes from a self-centered god of mischief to a more empathetic and heroic individual who seeks to understand himself and find his place in the universe beyond his predestined role as a villain. His quest for self-love comes in the form of loving Sylvie, his variant. The most powerful scene in this season is where they reach the end of time, and Sylvie finally gets her chance to kill He Who Remains, but as Loki now understands the stakes and value of life, he attempts to stop her. Sylvie believes that Loki still seeks a throne at this point, but for the first time ever, Loki understands what role he plays in this situation. He doesn't want a throne.
You want the throne.
I promise you from my heart, this isn't about a throne. The universe is in the balance. Everything we know to be true. Can't you see? This is bigger than our experience.
Loki understands why Sylvie is acting out. He understands her pain, her anger, her vengeance. His journey has taught him just as much. And so he stops her by saying,
I've been where you are. I've felt what you feel. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want a throne. I just want you to be okay.
And so Sylvie kisses Loki, illustrating the most twisted form of self-love. Loki's arc for this season is completed in this scene. And as Sylvie is a stubborn Loki variant, she goes ahead and kills He Who Remains. The one great thing this season did was establish all the people around Loki, people that he works alongside to get to this point. Mobius, Casey, Sylvie, B-15, and soon OB in season 2. He finally gets what it's like to be working in a team, what it means to belong, and it's so crazy to see Loki, who is surrounded by gods and warriors, find his place with TVA variants, something important that I'll touch on. And finally, we move on to Loki's conclusion, season 2, that asks a question that has been longing for 12 years. What does Loki's glorious purpose mean? What does it look like? This season perfectly personifies this. Loki finds himself trying to keep the TVA intact after the branches begin to go haywire. He meets OB and further brings Victor Timely, a Kang variant, into the picture. And aside all the technicalities and exciting scenes where they try to fix the loom and Loki becoming an engineering genius over centuries, I want to stick to the emotional core of the story. I think it begins when Loki understands the trick behind time slipping. Episode 5 goes over different sci-fi ways to control his time slipping through the ideologies of what, how, and why. Why does Loki keep time slipping and teleporting to Mobius, OB, B-15, Sylvie, and Casey? I think Loki's journey in understanding this power is supposed to be a parallel to Loki's understanding of his purpose. As OB asks,
So why do you need to do this?
Because if I can't save the TVA from being destroyed, there will be nothing to protect against what's coming.
and although this is a heroic thing to say and feel, and in line with who Loki has now become, he still isn't able to control his power with this thinking. The why isn't the point here. It isn't all about the TVA or the grand stakes of the multiverse. And I think this is where Sylvie shines as a character. When Loki travels through time to speak with her, she asks him what he truly wants.
What's wrong with wanting something, Loki? What do you want?
I want to save everything, all of it.
Is it really that hard? Come on, keep trying.
I want to save the TVA. I want my friends back. I don't want to be alone.
This scene digs into the truth of Loki's long and grueling journey. He's so tired of chasing this purpose that has no end and always leaves him hollow and alone.
But your friends are back where they belong.
But without them, where do I belong?
In a weird way, Loki finally found people that he feels like he belongs with, that he's worked together with, a weird sort of familial love that holds some type of power. And so the episode ends with him realizing,
It's not about where, when, or why. It's about who.
he finally understands that the stakes are more personal to him now. He wants to save his friends, and the motivation to do that allows him to time slip. And as weird as that sounds to say out loud, it's presented really well in the show. And so we get to the finale, titled Glorious Purpose, the same name given to the first episode of this show. Loki spends majority of the episode trying to rewrite the story and save the TVA, but most importantly, his friends. He spends centuries learning physics and engineering, tries millions of different ways to get Victor to the loom, but nothing works. He can't seem to change anything. Loki goes back to He Who Remains in the past and finds out that the loom is a failsafe, that it deletes every other branch to set the sacred timeline back in order. So no matter what he does, he can't save all those branches because of the loom. Breaking it kills his friends as well, as there's no one to look after all the timelines. And so we get a little foreshadowing of what's to come from He Who Remains.
Every moment of peace you've ever experienced was yours.
Because I was here, alone, at the end of time.
I understand.
And you want to break the loom. What do you think would happen to your friends?
Hinting at the burden that it takes to sit at this position. And so He Who Remains gives Loki a choice to let Sylvie kill him and cause a universe-ending war, or to kill Sylvie so that he lives and they attempt to protect what's remaining. The stakes have never been so high and personal for Loki. Does he choose between one life or trillions? And so he goes back into the past for some advice from Mobius, his friend. And Loki gets advice that changes the way that he sees his destiny and purpose.
Mobius, I need your help. How do you choose who lives and who dies?
Gotta keep the big picture in mind. Most purpose is more burden than glory. The hard thing to do was the thing that had to be done. And by hard, I mean impossible. Now, there's no comfort. You just choose your burden.
Thank you, Mobius.
And as he lets Mobius go, he knows what he has to do. He finally understands his purpose. It isn't glory. It's a burden. He looks back at all the people that have prepared him for this moment and steps down to approach the loom and says the lines that solidify him as one of the best written characters in the MCU, with parallels that stretch back to his first appearance as the selfish and resentful god that he was.
I could have done it, Father!
I know what kind of god I need to be.
For you!
For you.
For all of us!
For all of us.
Loki approaches the loom, burning his skin while he does it, embracing who he is and who he's meant to be. He destroys the loom and gives life to each branch, a visual storytelling feat without even one word. The scene is able to illustrate what Loki's purpose is now. And so he takes the burden of each branch onto himself and looks back one last time to remind himself of the burden of his purpose. It's to save his friends and bear it so no one else has to. Embracing his fear to be alone, as he's doing it for all of them. The soundtrack swells as Loki continues his ascent by giving life to each branch, weaving them into his cape as he struggles to climb, and finally makes it to his promised throne, his birthright, a crown that he strived for his entire life.
There's no throne. There is no version of this
where you come out on top.
And as he pulls the branches together, using all the pain, hurt, resentment, and anger that has defined him, I'm sure he feels that conclusive acceptance and love that the end of his journey granted, giving him the power to form the tree of life, giving everyone and his friends a chance to write their own stories. Loki has achieved his glorious purpose. The series ends with Loki content with his sacrifice, accepting his burden, and seeing his friends live on without him. The emotional weight of Loki's journey is staggering. This is what happens when the MCU commits to taking their characters and stories seriously, like we, the audience, all do. We see a vengeful, deceitful character that had to be unbound by time to discover what his purpose is. And there's something so human and beautiful about all of that. Despite all the insane multiversal stakes and looms and Kangs, the story stays true to a character's journey. A story where we see Loki revel and regress into evil time after time, but once he finally gets that acceptance and love from Thor, Odin, Sylvie, Mobius, his friends, and most importantly himself, he realizes his true potential, marking an end to his 13-year saga.